Racist woman screams, theft. Big Shaq stands silent. A dog goes missing, and blame finds its way to the tallest shadow on the block. No evidence, just a lie wrapped in tears. But when the police arrive, the truth walks in behind them. This isn't just a story about a missing pet. It's about the weight of a lie, and the man who refused to carry it. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun came up soft and golden over Beechwood Lane, spilling light over driveways and porches like warm honey. It was the kind of morning that made people slow down their steps, take a longer sip of their coffee, and wave a little longer to the neighbors they'd otherwise pass with nothing more than a nod. It was the kind of day you wished could stay suspended forever. The breeze was mild, the sky clean, and the world felt temporarily unburdened. It was a day that made even silence feel sacred. And in the center of it all was Big Shaq. Not the basketball star, not the brand, just the man. Shaquille O'Neal. Towering, broad-shouldered, gentle-eyed. He moved through the neighborhood not like a celebrity, but like someone who belonged. He wasn't performing kindness, he lived. On Beechwood Lane, he was the guy who mowed the Andersons' lawn when Mr. Anderson pulled his back. The man who quietly paid for young Lenny's school supplies without ever telling his parents. He was the one who people called on when something broke, or something hurt. The kids didn't call him Mr. O'Neal, they called him Big Shaq, like he was both friend and folklore. That morning he was crouched beside young Jesse Miller's bike, the chain slack and twisted, grease smudging his massive hands, as he tightened bolts with a toolkit too small for his frame. Jesse stood nearby, sneakers tapping nervously on the pavement. "You sure you don't need help?" Jesse asked. Shaq smiled without looking up. "I got this, little man." And he did. In a matter of minutes, the chain was fixed, the wheels spun true, and Jesse was racing down the sidewalk, whooping with joy. Shaq watched him go with the soft satisfaction of a job well done, wiping his hands on a rag pulled from his back pocket. Further down the lane, Mrs. Langston, 82 and sharp as ever, was struggling with her grocery bags. Shaq ambled over, lifted them like they weighed nothing, and walked them inside. She pretended to protest, but her smile betrayed her. "You spoil me, Shaquille," she said. "You deserve it, Miss Langston," he replied. "You taught half this block how to read." That was Big Shaq's way. Never loud, never flashy, just present, quietly changing the mood of a place by being himself. He made space for others, and somehow filled it too. But that morning, something shifted. Barely noticeable at first, like the moment the wind changes direction without warning. It began with a porch. Halfway down Beechwood Lane, a freshly painted blue house stood tall and polished. The kind of house with clean shutters, polished door knockers, and flower pots lined like soldiers on the porch steps. It had only been occupied for 2 weeks. The owner had moved in without much noise, no introduction. Her name was Clarissa Whitmore, mid-40s, sharp, platinum hair, pressed linen shirts, always carried her tiny white Pomeranian, Snowflake, in a sequined purse or under her arm. Clarissa hadn't spoken much since arriving. No potlucks, no waves, no mingling. But she watched. That morning she sat on her porch in a white wicker chair, sunglasses perched low, Snowflake curled on her lap, and she watched Big Shaq. Not like the others watched him, with familiarity or gratitude. Her gaze was calculating, cold, curious, but not kind. When Shaq passed by, she didn't wave. She just stared, her jaw tight, her eyes shielded by the glare of her glasses. Shaq nodded politely. She didn't nod back. He didn't take it personally. People came with all kinds of pasts. Maybe she was just private, or shy. He moved on, whistling low as he headed toward Mr. Vargas's fence, the one that had started leaning like it was drunk. But even as he walked, he could feel the weight of her eyes on his back, like a pinprick, like a thread tugging at the ease of the day. That evening, after the sun dipped and the golden warmth faded into a pink hush, the neighborhood settled into its nightly rhythm. Screen doors creaked, sprinklers clicked on, and lights blinked across kitchen windows like stars. Shaq sat on his porch with a tall glass of lemonade, scrolling his phone and smiling at pictures his daughter Mamara had sent from her college dorm. Books scattered, roommates laughing, her future unrolling ahead of her. Down the lane, Clarissa paced her yard. Snowflake wasn't in her arms. Her steps were tight. Her phone was clutched white-knuckled in her hand, Occasionally she would glance toward Shaq's house, and then quickly look away. Shaq noticed, not out of paranoia, but because he noticed everything. That's how he lived. Aware, but he said nothing. He just sipped his lemonade and let the night close in. The next morning the air had changed. Beechwood Lane didn't wake up to birdsong and sunshine. It woke to sirens. Clarissa was in the middle of the road, screaming. Snowflake was gone. Her voice cracked with hysteria as she paced barefoot in her robe, pointing in wild directions, face flushed with grief or rage, or something unnameable. They took her. They stole her, she cried, sobbing into her phone. Neighbors opened doors, stepped onto lawns, watched. No one knew what to say. And then she said it. I saw him here yesterday, she wailed, pointing toward Shaq's house. He was right there. The accusation didn't ring out like a direct punch, more like a whisper turned sour. People looked toward Shaq's porch, where he stood frozen, coffee in hand, his brow furrowed, not with fear, but confusion. He hadn't even left the block. He'd spent the whole day fixing fences, lifting groceries, repairing bikes. But Clarissa's finger was steady. Her voice trembled, but her certainty didn't. I know what I saw, she snapped. He's the only stranger I've seen near my house. Stranger. That word landed harder than any other. Shaq's heart beat slow but heavy. He set his coffee down. The world hadn't shifted. It had simply shown its undercurrent. The fragile line between belonging and suspicion. The police pulled up moments later. Beechwood Lane held its breath. Shaq didn't run. He didn't yell. He stood tall, hands visible, heart guarded. The officers approached, not hostile, not violent, but firm. One of them nodded at him, like he was already halfway guilty. Sir, the officer said, we'd like to ask you a few questions. Shaq's voice was steady. Of course. The neighbors stood still. Some looked away. A few whispered. Jesse clutched his mother's hand, watching as the man who'd fixed his bike was questioned like he'd committed a crime. Clarissa stood across the street, tears smearing her makeup, face twisted in some strange performance of sorrow and triumph. The dog was missing. Her suspicion was loud, and her eyes never left Shaq. In that moment, the warmth of Beechwood Lane melted away. The sun still shone, but the light no longer felt safe. The gentle giant who'd carried so many through their small struggles was now under scrutiny, not for anything he'd done, but for the space he took up, for being seen in a place where someone decided he didn't belong. As the police jotted down his answers and nodded slowly, Shaq met their eyes, one by one. He didn't plead. He didn't argue. He just, because he knew, lies have short legs, and truth, though slow, always arrives. The day ended not with the sun, but with something heavier. A question, a crack, and somewhere deep inside Beechwood Lane, something had been stirred awake, something that wasn't going to go back to sleep anytime soon. At first, Shaq let it roll off his back. People like Clarissa had a way of building walls before they knew the neighborhood. Maybe she'd had a bad experience. Maybe she was just private. He didn't take offense. Not yet. But over time, her stillness took on a sharper shape. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was scrutiny. The small moments added up. One morning, Shaq passed by her porch just as her mail carrier dropped a package at the steps. As he approached to cross the driveway, Clarissa stood up sharply, grabbing Snowflake and backing toward the door like he was a threat. She didn't say anything, just clutched the dog and stared until he moved on. Later, he overheard her telling the mailman, "Some people don't understand boundaries," though she never named who. She didn't have to. There was another day when Jesse tripped on the curb near her house and scraped his elbow. Shaq rushed over, helping him up, checking for blood. Jesse winced, and Shaq comforted him with that low, calm voice that could settle chaos. But when Shaq looked up, Clarissa was already on her porch, phone in hand, eyes locked on them like she was waiting for something incriminating to happen. Jesse noticed too and whispered, "Why's she always looking at you like that?" Shaq didn't answer. He just helped the kid home. There was no shouting, no confrontation. But the tension was real, thick, and growing like a weed in the sidewalk crack. Every smile Shaq gave was met with silence. Every polite nod was returned with suspicion. And the dog, Snowflake, yipped defensively any time Shaq came within 20 feet, like it had been trained to react. The other neighbors started to notice. One by one, they began to adjust the way they greeted her. Mrs. Langston no longer waved. The Henderson twins, who sold lemonade near the corner, stopped offering her free cups. Not because of any spoken offense. Clarissa hadn't said much to anyone, but vibes travel, and hers was loud in the quietest way. Shaq wasn't looking for trouble. He never did. But he also wasn't naive. He'd seen this kind of thing before, where someone didn't need a reason to dislike you, just a story they wrote in their head. A story they were ready to believe before you even opened your mouth. And Clarissa, she was an author of silent suspicion. One Friday afternoon, Shaq was setting up for the monthly neighborhood cookout, unfolding chairs and checking the grill, when Clarissa walked past. It was the first time she'd stepped off her porch. Snowflake sat in her arms, nestled into a pink sling. She didn't greet anyone. She didn't smile, just walked along the edge of the event like she was studying a crime scene. When she passed Shaq, she turned her head slightly, just enough to speak without fully facing him. "I hope everyone here's being careful with their things," she said. The words were light, but they landed hard. She didn't stop walking, didn't wait for a response. Snowflake yipped twice like punctuation. Shaq didn't respond. He didn't need to. A few neighbors glanced up. Someone muttered, "What the hell does that mean?" under their breath. But she was already gone, walking away like she'd dropped a hint instead of a hand grenade. That evening, after everyone had packed up and headed inside, Shaq sat on his porch alone. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple, the last light of day stretching long over the roofs. But the peace he usually felt at this hour was thinner now, like something in the air had changed. Not dramatically, not violently, just enough. Clarissa was back on her porch. She had a glass of wine this time, the stem twirling between her fingers. Her eyes weren't on the sunset. They were on him. Shaq nodded once, a gesture stripped of warmth now, but still polite. Clarissa raised her glass slowly in response, like a toast. The gesture was strange, theatrical, and her smirk returned, that same one that didn't quite reach her eyes. She took a sip, then turned back toward her door, vanishing inside without a word. The porch light flicked on behind her like a spotlight on an empty stage. Shaq sat still for a long time. He knew something was building. He could feel it. The tension wasn't just social discomfort anymore. It was pressure, quietly swelling, like the air before a storm. He didn't know what Clarissa was thinking, what story she was shaping, but he knew her gaze was no longer passive. It was targeted. And somehow, even without knowing him, she'd already made up her mind. He didn't know yet that Snowflake would go missing, that sirens would soon echo down Beechwood Lane, that accusations would point his way like knives. But sitting there, under the soft glow of his porch light, he knew enough to feel the shift. The woman on the porch wasn't just watching him anymore. She was waiting. The morning sun hadn't yet burned off the cool breath of dawn, when something in Beechwood Lane snapped from quiet to chaos, where birds usually chirped and sprinklers rotated in lazy arcs over trimmed lawns. This time there were raised voices, open doors, and the strange electricity that comes when something has gone wrong. The calm order of the neighborhood had been cracked, and at the center of that break stood Clarissa Whitmore, barefoot in her robe, hair undone, face pale and frantic, screaming that her beloved Snowflake had vanished. People gathered slowly at first. One or two curious glances through blinds, a neighbor peeking out while sipping their coffee, but Clarissa's voice was cutting enough to summon more. Soon, the whole block seemed to pour onto their porches, or wander toward the source of the shouting. "She's gone," Clarissa wailed, holding a rhinestone leash in one hand, waving it like a flag. "She was here last night. She slept on the porch cushion. And now she's gone." Her cries weren't just panicked. They were charged. Each syllable rolled over itself like waves of emotion collapsing into hysteria. Her neighbors tried to calm her, but she brushed away their efforts with frantic movements, pacing like a woman possessed. Her voice climbed in pitch with every passing second. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was suspicion, and it was sharpening. "I know who I saw," she barked suddenly, her eyes narrowing, voice piercing the crowd like an arrow. "He was walking past just yesterday, staring, like he was casing the place." All heads turned, instinctively, in the direction of her outstretched finger. Clarissa pointed with accusation, not uncertainty. She wasn't just describing someone, she was naming a culprit. There, just a few houses down, stood Big Shaq. He was in his yard, holding a garden hose, watering the rows of flowers he had planted for Ms. Langston last spring. He wore a simple gray tee, and basketball shorts. His face was calm, but his hands had frozen in place, water continuing to arc silently over the pedals as the crowd's attention fell on him like a shadow. Clarissa's voice dropped an octave, raw now on the edge of cracking. He was the only one near my house. He looked at Snowflake. Don't tell me I imagined it. For a heartbeat, the world felt suspended, like the entire street was waiting for a cue. Neighbors exchanged glances, not sure how to react. A few looked down. A couple of them folded their arms. No one moved to support her, but no one spoke up for Shaq either. He stood still holding the hose, blinking once, then calmly shutting off the valve. He didn't speak. Not yet. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be twisted. Clarissa pulled out her phone and dialed 3 numbers. The words rang out like an alarm. I'm calling the police. The silence that followed was louder than her scream. Within minutes, the sirens arrived. 2 squad cars pulled onto Beechwood Lane, with the kind of authority that makes everyone stand a little straighter. Officer Raymond stepped out of one car, a man who'd patrolled this neighborhood for years, familiar with most of the residents. But today, his posture was different. Offensive. He approached Clarissa first, notebook out, nodding as she retold the story, more aggressively this time, voice trembling, eyes darting between her neighbors and the house she believed was hiding her dog. I let her sleep on the porch sometimes when the weather's nice. Clarissa explained tearfully. This morning I come out, and she's just gone. Her leash on the floor. There's no gate open, no hole in the fence, and he was walking by here yesterday, just eyeing everything. The officer scribbled notes. He asked, though he already knew the answer. Clarissa pointed again, this time with more flair, like a conductor commanding the climax of a symphony. That man, Big Shaq. I don't know his real name, but everyone calls him that. He's large, and he was right here. The officer looked over at Shaq, who remained standing by his front gate. He hadn't moved. His arms were crossed now, his expression unreadable, not afraid, but not amused either, just tired. A weariness had crept in around the corners of his eyes, one that didn't belong to this specific moment, but to a lifetime of similar ones that had been quieter, smaller, unreported. The officer approached. Sir, he said cautiously, we've had a report about a missing dog. Mind if we ask you a few questions? Shaq nodded. Sure. Have you seen a small white dog around here? Named Snowflake. Shaq shook his head slowly. Haven't seen her. I've been home all morning. The officer's pen hovered. Did you walk past her house yesterday? I walk past everyone's house. I live here. Shaq answered, not defensively, just stating a fact. Watered some plants, fixed a kid's bike, talked to Ms. Langston. Clarissa interjected from behind the cop, shouting. He looked at her like he wanted to grab her. I saw it. Shaq didn't flinch. He just turned to her, eyes steady. I've never touched your dog. The officer held up his hand. Ma'am, let me handle this. Beechwood Lane had grown still. Children had stopped riding bikes. Mr. Vargas leaned on his cane across the street. Even Parker, the teen who usually had earbuds in, had paused, one foot on his skateboard, listening. The officer jotted a few more notes, then looked toward Shaq's porch. Mind if we have a quick look around your yard? Shaq's voice was calm, low. You got a warrant? The question hung in the air, not aggressive, but solid. It reminded the officer this man knew his rights. Still, the officer softened. It's just a missing dog, sir. Shaq looked at him for a long second, then nodded once. Check the yard. You won't find her. As Officer Raymond stepped inside the gate, Clarissa walked up behind him, her face contorted into something between sorrow and triumph. Her grief was still present. Her dog was missing after all. But so was something else. Something that liked being seen, liked being believed. The search was brief. Snowflake was nowhere to be found, not in the bushes, not under the porch, not behind the shed, nothing. Officer Raymond stepped back onto the sidewalk, closing his notebook. Nothing here, he said aloud. Clarissa's tone shifted again, this time from panicked to righteous. He probably hid her somewhere else. Maybe gave her to someone. I want to press charges. You can't press charges without evidence, ma'am, Raymond replied coolly. I know he took her. He sighed. Without proof, it's just speculation. Clarissa turned to the neighbors. He doesn't belong here, she snapped. He's been creeping around since I moved in. Everyone saw it. But now, eyes started to shift. The same neighbors who had hesitated earlier looked unsure. A few glanced at Shaq, who remained calm, his presence grounded like the roots of a tree too deep to be shaken by a storm. Parker took a step forward. He's helped every person on this street, lady, including me. Clarissa turned on him. Do you have any idea what a rare dog like Snowflake is worth? She's not worth more than someone's dignity. Mrs. Langston snapped from her porch, her voice firm. The spell was breaking. Clarissa's face tightened. Her chest heaved, fury caught between embarrassment and disbelief. You're all blind, she muttered, turning away, gripping the empty leash like a weapon. The police left soon after, promising to keep an eye out and encouraging Clarissa to post flyers. Shaq didn't speak again. He returned to his porch, picked up the hose, and resumed watering the flowers, like reclaiming a sense of normalcy that had been temporarily stolen. But inside he felt the shift. A story had been planted. The suspicion was out in the open now, no longer veiled in passive-aggressive stares or polite distance. It had taken the form of accusation, of public spectacle, and even though nothing was found, and no crime committed, something had already been taken from him. The illusion that good deeds were always a shield. Later that evening, a small flyer fluttered onto Shaq's lawn. A picture of Snowflake, the word reward printed in large red block letters. He picked it up, looked at the dog's face, and sighed. He wasn't angry. Not yet. But he knew this wasn't over. Later he found himself walking inside without realizing it, reaching for a box beneath his bed, one he hadn't opened in a long while. Inside were old clippings, faded photos, letters, and a stack of Polaroids bound with a rubber band. At the top was a picture of him as a child, standing beside a woman with strong arms and a smile that knew things. Lucille O'Neill, his mother, the woman who taught him how to be still when the world was loud. He held the photo in his palm, closed his eyes, and was back in her kitchen, sunlight slipping through the blinds, the hum of the fridge, and the weight of her voice anchoring the moment. If you ever get accused, baby, she'd said once, wiping flour from her hands, don't waste your breath shouting. They'll already believe what they want to. Just stand. Just breathe. Let the truth catch up. Shaq had been 12 when a store clerk followed him through an aisle because he'd touched a pack of gum. Lucille hadn't raised her voice. She'd paid for the gum, told the clerk thank you, and walked her son out of the store with her head high and her back straight. You let folks carry their own guilt, she'd said then. You don't carry it for them. Now, sitting on his couch with that memory, Shaq felt the familiar ache of those words settle deep. He hadn't stolen anything, hadn't done anything, but Clarissa had placed a weight on his shoulders, not of guilt, but of implication, and it was heavy in its own way. That afternoon, he went about his routine, slow and deliberate. He returned a library book to Miss Langston, replaced a cracked planter in the garden near the sidewalk, waved to Parker across the street. But the ease of movement had shifted. People were still kind, still polite, but something lived behind their eyes now. Hesitation, or worse, quiet curiosity. Not everyone, but enough to notice. He walked into the local corner store to grab lemonade and noticed the conversation behind the counter dipped a little when he entered. Nothing direct, nothing said, just a pause, like the air got heavier for a second. He paid and left without a word. Back on Beechwood Lane, Clarissa sat on her porch again, Snowflake's empty cushion beside her, like a permanent fixture of blame. She watched him return, her eyes flicking over him like reading a headline. This time, she didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The damage was in the silence. Jesse, the boy with the bike, ran up to Shaq near the curb, holding a comic book in one hand. Mr. Shaq? He said, looking up. My mom says people think you took that lady's dog. That's not true, right? Shaq looked down at him, his heart catching in his throat. No, Jesse, he said, voice low. That's not true. Okay, Jesse said simply. I told her you didn't. You helped me. You're good. Shaq smiled. But it was thin. Thanks, little man. The boy ran off. But his words stayed. Shaq knew Jesse believed him. But what about the others? What about the quiet ones? The next morning, flyers had multiplied, posted on lampposts, stuffed in mailboxes, taped to windshields. A photo of Snowflake, all fluff and whiteness, with reward $5,000. No questions asked, in bold red letters. Clarissa's number listed at the bottom. As Shaq walked to his mailbox, he noticed one stuffed in there too. He pulled it out, held it a moment, then dropped it into the recycling bin, without a glance. Across the street, Clarissa watched. Her face was unreadable. Neither smug nor sad. Just, and for a flicker of a moment, he wondered if she believed her own story. If she had told it to herself so many times that it had become real. Or maybe it had never mattered to her whether it was true or not. Just that it could be believed, just that the image she cast had enough polish to be accepted. That night, Shaq sat on his porch again, arms resting on his knees, watching the dusk settle. The warmth of summer was still in the air, but it felt cooler now. The kind of cool that sinks into bones and lingers. He didn't feel anger, not the loud kind. What he felt was deeper, more hollow, a crack in the trust he'd built, a fracture that wasn't loud enough to fix, but deep enough to hurt. He closed his eyes, listening to the wind, to the distant hum of a lawnmower, to the street that used to feel like his own. Lucille's voice came back, steady as ever. Let the truth catch up, son. You just keep standing. So, he did. Because the weight of a lie didn't crush him. It just reminded him of the long, quiet strength it takes to be the one falsely accused. And in that quiet he stood tall. Beechwood Lane had always been a place of small routines. Lawns were trimmed on Thursdays. Trash cans wheeled out on Tuesday nights. Birthday balloons clipped to mailboxes every so often. A quiet rhythm of suburban life that made time feel slower, safer. But now that rhythm had started to hitch. The mornings still brought sunlight, but conversations felt thinner, greetings shorter. Doors closed a little faster when someone walked by. It wasn't an explosion. It was erosion. After Clarissa's accusation, after the sirens and questions and flyers, something subtle shifted. It didn't come with shouting or confrontation. It came with glances, with pauses, with silence so full it was louder than words. Some people, the ones who had always waved, stopped first, just slight hesitations. Maybe they were unsure. Maybe they were nervous. But suspicion didn't need proof to spread. It just needed an echo. Shaq felt it every time he stepped out. The woman who used to ask for help lifting groceries suddenly had her teenage son do it. The mailman who always chatted a minute now only gave a nod and moved on. Even the couple next door, the Wards, who'd once borrowed his ladder and laughed on his porch, were suddenly too busy to come to the cookout he still planned to host. Clarissa didn't need to say more. Her words had already been seeded, and now they were growing, not into outrage, but into doubt. Quiet, persistent doubt. Still, not everyone turned. There were those who remembered. Mrs. Langston, who kept fresh cookies on her counter and refused to pull her curtains when others did. She made a point of crossing the street just to say good morning to Shaq, every day since the incident. "You think I'm gonna forget who fixed my porch after that storm?" she said once, loud enough for her voice to carry. "Some of us know better." Then there was Parker, the teenager who had once tagged his own garage door, and tried to blame it on some punk from another block. It had been Shaq who walked him back to his house, not to accuse but to ask why. Shaq had never raised his voice, just asked questions until Parker broke down and confessed to his mom. Parker never forgot that. Since the flyer went up, he'd been watching everything. Clarissa, the whispers, the people who once praised Shaq now stepping back with careful neutrality. But teenagers didn't carry weight in grown-up conversations. Neither did elderly women, it seemed. And certainly not a 10-year-old boy. Jesse had taken it the hardest. He adored Shaq, followed him around like a shadow on weekends, and thought the man was a superhero. When he heard his mother whisper to the neighbor on the phone, "I don't know, maybe she's right, who really knows anyone?" Jesse had burst out of his room in tears. "He didn't do it," he cried. "He fixed my bike. He reads my comics with me." His mother had hushed him, put a hand on his shoulder. "Sweetheart, it's not that simple." But to Jesse, it was. Shaq had helped. Shaq had shown up. That was simple, but when he tried to tell others, to speak up during a neighborhood gathering at the cul-de-sac, the adult smiled politely and gently ushered him back toward the juice table. He'd stood there, arms crossed, lips trembling, clutching a crumpled drawing he had made of Shaq flying through the sky like a hero. No one asked what it was. Shaq, for his part, didn't retreat. He kept doing what he did, helping, fixing, checking in. Not because he was trying to prove anything, but because that's who he was. But he could feel the difference now. In every encounter, people received his kindness like a gift that came with a question mark. One afternoon, he was returning a lost cat to the Nelsons' yard when he noticed a group of neighbors across the street. 4 or 5 of them gathered around Clarissa's driveway. She was holding court, holding Snowflake's empty rhinestone collar like a relic. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried just enough for certain phrases to float. I just think we need to be more aware of our surroundings. Not saying he's dangerous, but look at the size of him. These things don't just happen by coincidence. Each sentence was draped in plausible deniability, wrapped in enough softness to avoid direct blame, but not enough to hide the intent. The more she spoke, the more the others nodded. Some with hesitation, some too quickly, and one or two, to Shaq's quiet heartbreak, were people he'd once helped move furniture or fix pipes. Parker stood on the corner, listening. He'd heard enough. That evening, he rode his bike up to Shaq's porch, where the man sat reading a worn-out novel, legs stretched long across the steps. You ever think about just yelling at them? Parker asked, kicking his board up into his hands. Shaq closed the book gently. What would that do? Maybe make them feel stupid. Shaq smiled, but it didn't reach far. That's not how truth works. It doesn't shout its way through a lie. It waits, stands still, lets the lie trip over itself. Parker shook his head. You're better than me. I've had more practice. The boy didn't push. He just sat beside him, quiet. Clarissa's influence deepened as the days passed. She started hosting short gatherings, not parties, just casual neighborhood chats. People came, not many, but enough to give her platform weight. At one, she passed around a new flyer, bigger reward, updated photo. Her expression was solemn. All I want is justice, she said, eyes moist, voice trembling just enough. Shaq, watching from a distance, recognized the performance. He'd seen it before, the kind of grief that gathers sympathy not to heal but to harness. He didn't hate her, but he saw her clearly now. She wasn't broken. She was building something. A story that gave her significance. And he was the foil in that story, whether he asked to be or not. The cookout was still planned. Shaq didn't cancel it. But only a third of the usual crowd showed. Clarissa didn't come, of course. Neither did the Wards, or the Dales, or Mrs. Jefferson, who once brought her famous pecan pie every year. Shaq grilled anyway, served the kids, made space for conversation. Mrs. Langston came, sat at her usual table with 2 lemonades, one for her, one for him. You know, she said, when I first moved here, folks whispered about me too. Said I was too old to live alone, probably losing it. Took me 2 years to make him stop saying it. Shaq nodded. What changed? She smiled. I outlived their nonsense. That night, Shaq cleaned up alone. Parker helped stack chairs. Jesse had fallen asleep under the big oak tree with a plate of half-eaten beans beside him. Shaq carried him home gently, handed him off to his mother with a nod. She didn't meet his eyes. The weight of doubt wasn't something you could lift. It settled into the cracks. It seeped into interactions and reshaped them without force. It didn't matter that nothing had been proven. It didn't matter that there was no evidence. The story had been told, and now it echoed, hollow, but persistent. And still, he stood. Because not everyone turned. Some just needed time. And some, like Jesse and Parker, were already turning back. It was after midnight when Parker sat alone in his room, headphones off for once, the low blue light of his monitor casting shadows across the posters plastered on his walls. He should have been asleep, but something kept buzzing at the back of his brain like a splinter he couldn't find. It wasn't just what Clarissa had said, it was how everyone else started believing it. He'd watched Beechwood Lane twist on itself over the last few days, the warmth bleeding out of it like a slow leak in a tire. The same people who'd once sung Big Shaq's praises were now cautious, uncertain, watching him the way Clarissa always had, as if goodness was something that could be revoked by rumor. Parker couldn't let it go. He remembered the exact day Shaq helped his family, 2 summers ago, when his dad had lost his job, and they were a month behind on rent. The landlord was knocking every morning, his mom pretending it was the wind. Shaq had pulled Parker aside while they were walking back from the rec center, handed him an envelope and said, "Give this to your mom. Tell her it's from someone who remembers what it's like to struggle." No one else knew about that, not even Parker's dad, and Shaq never brought it up again. Now here they were, people whispering, judging, turning, and Clarissa was orchestrating it with a leash and a pair of fake tears. Something about it didn't sit right. She talked like she knew everything, like her word was law. But Parker had seen enough YouTube crime breakdowns to know one thing. When stories don't line up, there's usually something in the footage. His parents' house had a solid security setup. Nothing fancy, but enough. His dad worked night shifts and insisted on cameras, Doorbell, driveway, side yard. Parker had access to the app, mostly because he liked watching raccoons run off with trash lids. But now the idea hit him hard. Maybe the cameras had seen something the night Snowflake disappeared. Something Clarissa hadn't mentioned. He booted up the security app and started scrolling through timelines. The footage from the night in question, 2 days ago, was there. Grainy in some places, but functional. The street was quiet at 11:12 p.m. A few porch lights on, some shadows moving across the sidewalk. A car or two rolled by, headlights carving temporary shapes against fences. Nothing unusual, until 12:03 a.m. A figure. Parker leaned in, pausing, zooming. The angle wasn't perfect, but it captured part of Clarissa's side yard, just enough of the corner near her flower bed and porch steps. A shape moved into frame, not Shaq, not even close, smaller, lighter on their feet. The frame rate dropped a few times, but the figure lingered, crouching, moving slowly, almost as if looking for something. Parker squinted, replayed it 3 more times. The shape was wearing something loose, maybe a coat or shawl, and their frame was narrower than Shaq's by far. The figure had shoulder-length hair, moving in ways that didn't match a tall man's gait. And then came the clearest frame. The figure turned ever so slightly, not toward the camera, but enough to reveal a sliver of their face. Not a man. It was a woman, and she wasn't walking a dog. She was holding something small, white, struggling with it. For a fraction of a second, Parker saw a blur of movement, a dog wriggling in her arms, then going still. The woman backed into the shadow of Clarissa's hedge and disappeared behind the side gate. His heart kicked. He sat back in the chair, staring at the still image on the screen. That wasn't Shaq. Not by size, not by shape, not by anything. He replayed it again, then exported the clip, naming it porchghost.mp4, and dropped it onto a flash drive. By morning the sun was up, and so was Parker. He hadn't slept. His mom noticed the bags under his eyes, asked if he was studying too hard. He mumbled something and slipped out with the drive in his pocket, pedaling toward Shaq's house, like something in him had been wound tight all night. Shaq was already outside, sweeping his walkway, the same way he did every Saturday. Like the world wasn't poking holes in his name. Parker rolled to a stop and held up the flash drive. "You need to see this." Shaq blinked, his expression steady. "What's that?" "Footage from our camera. From the night that dog disappeared. It wasn't you, man. It was a woman." For the first time in days, something shifted in Shaq's face. Not relief, not even surprise. Just a small flicker of acknowledgement, like he'd been waiting for something to cut through the fog. They moved inside, and Parker plugged the drive into Shaq's old laptop. The footage played silently. Shaq sat beside him, watching every frame with sharp eyes. When the figure appeared, he didn't lean forward or gasp. He just nodded slowly. "That's not me." "No, sir," Parker said. "And that dog? That's Snowflake. You can see her squirming. She didn't run off. She got taken." Shaq paused the video. "Can you send this to me?" "Already done. Sent it to your email, and backed it up on a second drive. If the police see this..." He didn't need to finish. Shaq leaned back in the chair, exhaled. The air in the room felt different, lighter, but also heavier in implication. The footage wasn't just proof, it was motive. Someone else had taken the dog, someone Clarissa hadn't mentioned, and she had blamed him without hesitation, not because she knew he did it, but because she assumed he could have. Later that day, Shaq made a quiet call to Officer Raymond. He didn't demand anything, just said there was something they should take a look at. Raymond agreed to come by in the afternoon. In the meantime, Shaq returned to his usual tasks. Watered flowers, waved to passing cars. Clarissa stood on her porch, arms folded, sunglasses back in place like armor. She didn't look smug now, just alert, watchful. When the police cruiser turned onto the street around 3 p.m., neighbors stepped out again. Curious, the same way they had when Clarissa first cried theft. But this time, the energy was different, not electric, but unsettled. Shaq met the officer halfway. Parker was there too, holding a printed still from the footage. The moment the woman turned just slightly, her outline clear, Snowflake's form pressed against her coat. Raymond studied it, brows furrowing. "That's not you." "No, it isn't. And she's holding the dog." "Yes." "Who do you think it is?" Shaq shrugged. "I don't know. But you might want to ask why Clarissa didn't mention anyone else being there. The officer took the printout and nodded once. We'll look into it. And just like that, the storm began to shift. By evening, whispers had changed shape. Parker had already texted the clip to 3 other neighbors. Ms. Langston played it on her tablet during dinner and made sure her niece saw it. Jessie's mom, who'd been tight-lipped since the incident, stood by her fence and muttered, "I knew something didn't feel right." People didn't say sorry. Not yet. But the tide was pulling back. Clarissa, meanwhile, stayed quiet. Her porch remained her stage. But she didn't perform that day. When the police knocked on her door around 6 p.m., she answered with a half-smile and a shrug. "I haven't seen anything suspicious," she told them. Raymond showed her the image. She stared at it a little too long before speaking.
"That could be anyone."
"But it wasn't him," Raymond said flatly. "We'll be in touch." By nightfall, Shaq sat on his porch again, not triumphant, but centered. The footage hadn't just cleared his name, it exposed something deeper. Clarissa didn't care if he'd done it. She'd used him as a shield, as a scapegoat, because it was easy, because when she pointed at the largest, kindest figure on the street, some people didn't question her. They just nodded. Now though, the questions were crawling back. Who was the woman in the footage? Why had Clarissa said nothing about her? And what was she trying to hide? The truth hadn't finished its walk yet, but it had picked up speed. By the next morning, Beechwood Lane wasn't buzzing. It was humming, not loud enough to draw attention from the outside, but inside the boundaries of that picture-perfect neighborhood. Something was happening. Something soft and slow and seismic. Conversations were changing tones. Eyes were lingering longer. And people were starting to say things not with certainty, but with doubt. It started, like most things these days, with a phone at a kitchen table. Parker's mother, Elise, sat sipping her coffee while scrolling through the still image her son had printed. The one from the security footage. The moment the figure appeared near Clarissa's porch, holding something white. She'd seen the video too, reluctantly at first, but it had been impossible to ignore, and more impossible to explain away. It wasn't Shaq, not even close. "You really think Clarissa didn't know?" she asked her husband across the counter. He looked up from his oatmeal, chewing slowly. She knew. So why'd she blame him? He didn't answer. Later that morning, Elise stopped by the hair salon on the edge of the block, the same place she got her highlights, the same place half the neighborhood cycled through every few weeks. As she sat beneath the dryer, foil in her hair and timer ticking, she leaned toward the stylist, Sherry, and said low, "You know that missing dog? I heard there's footage. It wasn't who we thought." Sherry arched a brow. "Seriously?" Elise nodded. Parker caught it on their security cam. A woman, not Shaq, and she was holding Snowflake. Sherry glanced toward the mirror, eyes flicking to the woman 2 chairs down. "I figured it didn't add up. That man's been more helpful than anyone I know." By lunchtime, Sherry had mentioned it to Mr. Vargas when he passed by, walking his dachshund. "It's always the ones pointing the loudest who've got something to hide," she muttered as she swept the floor. Miss Vargas, who'd once shared beers with Shaq after they fixed his leaky sink, nodded grimly. "He didn't deserve that," he said. Whispers carried faster than wind. The Hendersons, who lived near the community park, got word through their teenage daughter, who'd heard Parker talking about it after school. Mrs. Henderson, who had initially said nothing when Clarissa spread her suspicions, finally asked aloud, "Why didn't we ask for evidence before believing her?" No one answered. But the question hung in the air, heavy and haunting. It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was a crack in the wall. That night, at the local HOA meeting, usually reserved for fence complaints and noise ordinances, the footage came up. A neighbor named Ruth, who had once shied away from even looking Shaq in the eye after the accusation, spoke up this time. "I just think we moved a little fast. We judged too quick. That's not the kind of place we're supposed to be, is it?" Others murmured agreement. A few shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. Clarissa wasn't there. Her name wasn't spoken, but her absence screamed, and the whispers kept weaving. At the local cafe the next morning, 2 women at the window table lowered their voices, as one said, "What if she made it up? Not that the dog wasn't missing, but maybe she knew it wasn't him. Maybe she needed a reason to stir things." Her friend raised an eyebrow, or a reason to feel important. On Parker's street, Jesse's mom, who had stayed quiet since Jesse's outburst days ago, caught Shaq by his mailbox. She didn't make excuses, just stood there, holding a bag of groceries. "My son never stopped believing you," she said. Shaq looked at her. That means more than you know. She nodded, eyes glassy, then walked away. The shift was no longer just private. It was beginning to bloom into something more visible. People who had once turned their shoulders away, now turned their heads toward. Neighbors who had closed blinds were now opening them. Hesitantly, curiously, almost shamefully. Not everyone, but enough. Enough for Shaq to notice the weather was changing. Still, the whispers hadn't reached everyone. Clarissa remained on her porch. Less often now, and never for long. Her posture had changed. Not the confident recline from before, but a stiff-backed alertness, like someone waiting for a knock they could hear coming. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't smile. She watched, and her leash was still coiled beside the cushion. An artifact now, not a tether. At the grocery store, someone said they saw her at checkout. Sunglasses still on indoors. Speaking in short phrases. She didn't mention the dog. Didn't ask about neighborhood events. Just paid in cash and left quickly. Her bag pressed tight against her chest. But the most telling moment came 2 days later, when Mrs. Langston hosted her weekly book circle on her front lawn. Usually 6 to 8 people, folding chairs in a semicircle, iced tea sweating in glass pitchers. This week they weren't talking about books. They were talking about trust. I watched the video myself, Mrs. Langston said. I don't care what anyone says. That man has done more for this street than most of us combined. And we let one person, one new person, paint him as a threat. Just like that. I feel awful, someone said quietly. It's not enough to feel awful, another added. We should have stood up. A long silence followed. Then Parker, sitting off to the side with a lemonade, said without looking up, it's not too late to say something. By evening, another ripple moved through Beechwood. This time, not through whispers, but through intention. Someone knocked on Shaq's door. Then another. Not a flood, just a slow, steady trickle of people. Neighbors who came with nothing rehearsed. They came with banana bread, apology cards, awkward explanations, or just silence. Parker's parents came together, offered him dinner for the week. The Wards, who hadn't spoken to him since the dog went missing, came by just to say, we were wrong. Jessie's mom brought him a drawing her son had made, Shaq flying over the neighborhood again, this time with a giant shield in his hands. He didn't make speeches. He didn't gloat, he just said thank you. Shook hands. Let them linger in the discomfort of their own delay. But even as the apologies trickled in, the question stayed. Why had it taken a video for the truth to matter? Why hadn't his history been enough? The chain of whispers had twisted the street once, bent it into something brittle and cold. Now it was bending again, trying to correct itself. But the bruise was still fresh, and the truth was still stretching its legs. The story wasn't over, but at least, finally, it was being told from both sides. It was a Wednesday morning when they came back. The sound of tires crunching against the gravel at the corner of Beechwood Lane didn't raise alarm at first. This wasn't the kind of street where sirens blared often, and even when they did, it usually meant a false smoke alarm or a teenager's reckless joyride. But today was different. The silence that followed the soft roll of black and white vehicles into the neighborhood wasn't casual. It was taut. 2 patrol cars, 1 unmarked sedan. Shaq was on his porch again, sipping from a tall glass of water, his hand visibly still, his breath measured. He saw them before they saw him. He didn't get up. He didn't call out. He just waited, the same way he had learned to do his whole life, when the world came knocking without justification. 3 officers stepped out, the same young cop who had questioned him earlier, another uniformed woman with a clipboard, and a third man older than both, wearing plain clothes and a badge clipped to his belt. The sergeant. You could tell by the way the others deferred to him. He moved with weight, not swagger, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to take control of a room. The younger officer walked ahead. His posture was different this time. Firmer, less conversational. Mr. O'Neill, he said, voice formal. We have a warrant to conduct a search of your property. Shaq set his glass down. You planning on telling me what you're looking for? The officer didn't look him in the eye. We're acting on a report that a missing pet may be concealed here. Possibly relocated or hidden. Shaq stood, not fast, not slow. He didn't open the door, just looked at the sergeant. Do you believe that? The sergeant stepped forward. His face was unreadable. That's not my call to make until the search is complete. Shaq nodded once. Then without a word he opened the door and stepped aside. Inside, the officers moved quickly, but not chaotically. The young cop stayed near the entryway, while the woman moved toward the kitchen, opening cabinets, glancing behind the trash bin, checking the pantry like a dog might pop out wagging its tail at any moment. The sergeant walked methodically from room to room, inspecting closets, corners, behind doors, under beds. Shaq stood near the dining table, arms at his side, shoulders heavy but unbowed. The air inside felt tight, like it had thickened with every step they took. The hum of the refrigerator was suddenly the loudest sound in the house. They checked the backyard last. Beneath the porch, behind the small shed, inside the grill, nothing. No snowflake, no fur, no leash, no signs of anything but exactly what Shaq had always said. Nothing. The woman returned first. Clear. The young cop followed. Clear. The sergeant lingered a second longer in the hallway, then returned, face tighter than when he entered. Shaq didn't ask for an apology. He didn't expect one. He just looked the man in the eyes and waited. Before the sergeant could speak, a voice echoed from outside. Wait, don't go in yet. You need to see this. It was Parker, sprinting across the lawn, hair wind-whipped, tablet clutched in both hands like a piece of evidence he couldn't afford to drop. He bounded up the steps, breathless but focused, looking straight at the officers. I have something, he said, holding the tablet out toward the sergeant. It's from the night the dog disappeared. Security cam from my house. The sergeant looked at Shaq, then took the tablet and pressed play. The footage wasn't long, barely a minute, but it didn't need to be. The figure on screen was clear enough. The angle wasn't perfect, but the movements, the build, the way the figure handled the squirming white fluff in her arms. It was distinct. Not Shaq, not even close. The woman moved quickly, with purpose. The dog didn't appear scared, more confused until the figure vanished behind Clarissa's hedge and disappeared from sight. The sergeant didn't blink as he watched. His jaw clenched, then unclenched. His fingers tightened around the tablet. The other two officers leaned in to watch over his shoulder. The younger cop swallowed. The sergeant rewound, played it again. Then, slowly, he looked at Shaq. You have this saved elsewhere? Shaq nodded once. Email. 2 backups. The sergeant didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone, stepped away, and made the call. Shaq couldn't hear the full conversation. But the tone was clipped, efficient. Names were mentioned. Clarissa Whitmore came up twice. The sergeant's voice never rose, but it firmed. It had that low thunder in it, the kind that follows truth. When he returned, his expression had shifted. Mr. O'Neill, he said quietly, we won't be bothering you again. Shaq didn't smile, didn't nod, just said, go. The other officers glanced at each other, then at Parker. The younger one opened his mouth as if to say something, maybe to apologize, maybe to excuse, but stopped. There was nothing to say that wouldn't land hollow. The sergeant handed the tablet back to Parker and turned toward the door. We'll be in touch. Within minutes, they were gone. But the silence they left behind was louder than the knock they came in with. Parker stood awkwardly by the porch steps, shifting from one foot to the other. I'm sorry they had to do all that. I figured if they saw it for themselves, they couldn't ignore it. Shaq looked at the boy, his voice low but full. You did the right thing. Parker nodded, then backed down the steps slowly. I'll be around if you need anything. Shaq watched him disappear down the walk, his heart heavy, but something else blooming underneath. Not relief, not yet, but the faintest glimmer of something like it. The rest of the day passed slow and surreal. News moved quickly. People peeked through windows, watched from behind hedges, whispered across fences. By evening, Beechwood Lane was a different place than it had been that morning. Clarissa's porch was empty for once. No snowflake cushion, no lounge chair, just the echo of an unraveling. Shaq didn't tell anyone what happened. He didn't need to. The story was already running its course through the veins of the street. Not loud, not proud, but real. He sat on his porch as dusk crept in, shadows lengthening, the air carrying a different kind of weight now, one not of accusation, but of anticipation. People were going to talk, questions were going to be asked. Maybe answers would come, maybe they wouldn't, but one thing was certain. The lie had finally begun to collapse under its own weight. And truth, slow as it had been, had finally arrived. The storm didn't announce itself with thunder. It came with quiet knocks, murmured phone calls, and the slow click of realization falling into place. Beechwood Lane, already pulsing with the aftermath of the police's return and the security footage revelation, was on edge by the end of that week. Everyone felt it, a crackle in the air, like static before a radio tune hits just right. It wasn't just the whispers now, it was waiting for something to snap, for the truth to stop leaking, and finally spill. And it did. On a Friday, the morning started with a patrol car pulling into Clarissa's driveway. Nothing dramatic. No sirens, no cuffs. Just two officers and one man stepping out of the back seat in civilian clothes. He had a scar along his jaw and moved with the clunky confidence of someone who used to matter more than he did now. His name was Brent Coulson, not a name Beechwood Lane knew. Not yet, but Clarissa did. She met them at the door, hair pinned, lips glossed, still trying to wear grace like armor. But as soon as her eyes landed on Brent, her shoulders jerked back, and her mouth opened, not in greeting, not even in recognition, but in disbelief. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice thin. Brent didn't respond to her. He looked at the sergeant beside him and nodded. "I did it," he said plainly. "I took the dog." The words felt like bricks dropped in the center of the lawn. The officers had come prepared. Brent had already confessed, not in some cinematic moment of regret, but during a routine domestic dispute investigation, a few towns over. Apparently he'd been drinking, mouthing off to a friend at a bar, and when police showed up to calm things down, he let it slip. "Took her stupid little dog," he'd muttered, laughing. "She deserved it. That lying woman's always been about the performance." He didn't even know what had unfolded on Beechwood. He hadn't seen the fallout. He just wanted to rattle her, hurt her pride. So he snuck back through a gate he used to have a key for, grabbed Snowflake from the porch and drove off. He never intended to keep the dog long, just long enough for her to panic. But once the story started spinning, Clarissa didn't reach out. She didn't correct it. She didn't even try to retrieve the dog. And Brent? He enjoyed the silence. The officers asked the only question left. Did she know? Brent's answer came too fast to be a lie. "Yeah," he said. "She knew I had the dog. She told me to keep my mouth shut. Said she'd handle it." They brought the dog back that morning. Snowflake, shaken but unharmed, wrapped in a fleece blanket in the arms of a young officer. The sight of her stirred a strange silence on the street. Some neighbors gathered, watching from a distance. Clarissa stood frozen on her porch, face drained, every inch of poise slipping off her like a broken mask. She tried briefly to spin it. "He's lying," she said, her voice sharp, desperate. "He's always tried to ruin me. You can't believe a word he says." But no one was listening now. "Not really." The sergeant handed her the dog and said nothing. She didn't reach out right away. When she finally took Snowflake, the dog whimpered and turned her head away. That moment, that single flinch from the creature she claimed to love, shattered the last illusion left. Across the street, Shaq stood with Parker and Mrs. Langston. He hadn't spoken since the officers arrived. He watched the entire thing unfold with arms folded across his chest, his face unreadable. When Clarissa's eyes finally lifted and locked with his, something flickered in her expression. Not shame, not sorrow, but exposure. She had been seen, not the curated version of herself, not the one wrapped in white porch furniture and expensive perfume. The real her, the one who let someone else take the fall because it was easier than owning the truth, because the weight of guilt was lighter when someone else was carrying it. She opened her mouth, maybe to explain, maybe to defend herself. But Shaq turned before the words came out. He didn't walk away fast. He didn't storm off. He just stepped back down his porch, crossed the grass, and returned to his home without a word. Clarissa stayed frozen. The officers left soon after. Brent was taken back into custody for unrelated charges. But the damage was done. Not just to Clarissa's credibility, but to the delicate facade of Beechwood Lane's perfect politeness. The neighbors, once unsure, now stood scattered in awkward clumps, avoiding each other's eyes. No one asked Clarissa if she was okay. No one invited her for coffee. No one said a word. Later that afternoon, a U-Haul appeared in front of her house. She didn't cry. She didn't beg anyone for understanding. She packed with silent precision, moving boxes herself, dragging things across the porch she once ruled like a throne. Snowflake sat by the steps, no longer jeweled, no longer fluffed. Just a dog, quiet and watchful. No one helped her load. The neighborhood had seen her clearly now. And that vision didn't fade. Inside his home, Shaq sat at the table, eyes on the window, listening to the muffled sound of things being carried away. Lucille's photo sat in the corner by the bookshelf. He glanced at it, remembering her voice, steady, grounded, full of wisdom rooted in struggle. Let the truth catch up. Just stand still. He hadn't fought. He hadn't shouted. And still the lie had crumbled. Mrs. Langston stopped by that evening. She didn't stay long, just brought over a slice of pound cake and left it wrapped in foil on his porch railing. Not because you need it, she said, but because you deserve to be seen. Shaq smiled for the first time in days. Jesse ran up a bit later, breathless, gripping a homemade card. I made you a new superhero, he said. You're stronger now, even more than before. Shaq looked down at the drawing. This time, the superhero didn't fly. He stood on the ground, tall, unshaken, while lightning cracked around him. In one hand, he held a lantern. In the other, nothing at all. You think he's strong? Shaq asked. Jesse grinned. Yeah. He doesn't have to punch stuff. He just makes the bad stuff show itself. Clarissa's house was dark the next morning. The U-Haul was gone. A realtor's sign stood staked in the front yard. Clean, white, impersonal. Her name hadn't been spoken since the collapse. People were still figuring out what to do with their discomfort. Apologies had come in waves. Slow, awkward, incomplete. Some didn't know how to say sorry without sounding like they were excusing themselves. Others left notes. A few just waved a little longer now, like time could patch what trust had torn. Shaq didn't hold on to resentment, but he didn't forget either. The neighborhood was different now. Not perfect, but people started checking in with each other more. Not in performative ways, in real lingering ones. There were more front porch conversations, more questions that didn't assume Clarissa's collapse wasn't just hers. It was a mirror, and Beechwood Lane was learning how to live with what it reflected. As for Shaq, he returned to what he'd always done. Fixing fences, helping Jesse with his reading, carrying groceries for Mrs. Langston. But now when people saw him, they didn't just see Big Shaq. They saw the man who stood still while the lie fell apart around him, and never once let it crush him. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, the kind where time stretches a little slower, and the air carries the sweet drifting scent of cut grass and charcoal from someone's backyard. Beechwood Lane had seen a lot over the past few weeks. Suspicion, shame, silence, and truth. And though people had gone back to mowing their lawns and pulling in their trash cans, the rhythm hadn't quite returned. Something had changed. Not loud, not sudden, but real. It was Ruth Henderson who suggested the gathering. Not an official HOA meeting, not a block party, just a meeting. To clear the air, she said, her voice cautious but genuine. She put flyers in mailboxes. Nothing formal, just a white half-sheet with a time, a date, and the words, "Let's talk," together. Shaq received his copy like everyone else. Folded once, tucked under the welcome mat of his porch, just far enough in to require effort. He didn't react when he read it. He didn't RS. He simply placed the flyer inside a kitchen drawer next to his mother's recipe cards, and a bundle of letters from Mara. Saturday arrived, and folding chairs were set up under the old oak tree at the park, in the center of Beechwood. A breeze rustled the branches above, scattering golden leaves across the walkways. The turnout was bigger than expected. Families, couples, seniors, and teenagers. Some familiar faces, others who had mostly kept their heads down during the past weeks. They came not dressed for ceremony, but comfort jeans, sandals, coffee in hand, fidgeting with sleeves, not sure what to expect. The folding chairs creaked as people sat down. A microphone had been clipped to a makeshift stand, courtesy of Parker, who brought his dad's old speaker system. No banners, no refreshments, just an open space, and a lot of unspoken words floating between rows. Shaq arrived 15 minutes late. He didn't slip in quietly, didn't try to, but there was no entrance music either, just footsteps over grass, and the soft scrape of a chair being pulled from the back row. He didn't sit in the front. He didn't want to be the center. But all eyes found him anyway. Lucille came too. She hadn't been to Beechwood Lane in years, but when Mara sent her the news, the full story, not the headlines, she packed a small bag, took the train, and walked up her son's porch steps like she'd never left. Now she sat 2 rows behind him in a navy dress and gold earrings, her cane tucked beside her chair. She didn't need to speak to be heard. Her presence said everything. Ruth opened the meeting with a few stammered words. "We're here to acknowledge something," she said. "Something we let happen. Something we need to learn from." Then she stepped aside. There was a pause. A long one. The microphone stood there, empty, like a dare. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, Shaq stood. He didn't need a podium. He didn't clear his throat or tap the mic. He just stepped forward, placed his hand on the stand, and looked at the people who had watched him carry groceries and accusations with the same quiet strength. "I'm not here to be thanked," he said. "I'm not here for closure. That's not what this is." A few heads bowed. "I want to talk about what happens when people only see you clearly when something goes wrong. When being visible means being questioned. I've lived on this street for years, helped fix fences, watched your kids, carried things for your parents, and I was okay to some of you, until someone said I wasn't." Silence settled deep. The kind that demands listening. No evidence. No witness. Just a voice. And that voice was enough to make some of you look at me like I was a stranger, or worse, a threat. He let the words hang there, not as blame, but as truth. "I wasn't angry," he continued. "I was tired. Because I've seen it before, in cities, in schools, in locker rooms. And it always starts the same. Someone assumes, and everyone else hesitates. And by the time the truth comes out, the damage is already done." From the second row, Jesse watched wide-eyed, clenching his dad's hand. Lucille's gaze never wavered. Shaq breathed in, slow and deep. "I don't hate Clarissa," he said. "I don't wish her harm. I hope she learns something from all this. I hope we all do, because this isn't just about her. It's about the moment you chose not to question the accusation. The moment you nodded instead of asking, 'Are you sure?'" More heads lowered. A few people wiped at their eyes. But Shaq wasn't performing. His voice stayed even, quiet like water smoothing over stone. "I've got a daughter," he said. "She's in college, studying hard, living proud. And I tell her every day, walk like you belong, because you do, no matter where you are. But it gets hard to say that, when you've got to prove it over and over just to be seen as harmless." The crowd remained still. No applause, no interruptions, just breath and truth. "I'm not asking for an award," he said. "I'm asking for awareness, for something to shift. Because one day, it won't be me standing here. It'll be a kid, someone younger, someone who doesn't have the words or the weight to stand through it. And if we don't change the way we listen, the way we look, we'll let it happen again." He stepped back, didn't wait for a response, just returned to his seat beside Lucille, who gave his hand one firm squeeze. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Parker stood, fumbling with his phone, and said, "He didn't ask for thanks, but I still want to say it. Thanks, Mr. Shaq, for not giving up on us even when we didn't deserve it."
Jesse jumped up too. "He's my hero."
The tension broke then, not all at once, but enough. People clapped, not like a celebration, but a release. A slow gathering sound that came from more than just guilt. It came from recognition. After the meeting, people lingered. No one rushed home. Conversations bloomed in the grass. Quiet apologies, awkward reconnections. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in weeks stood shoulder to shoulder. Clarissa's house came up only once. Miss Langston said what everyone else was thinking. "She's gone, but what matters is what's still here, and what we do next." Shaq didn't stay long. He walked home slow, Lucille beside him, her cane clicking soft against the sidewalk. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. As they reached the porch, Jesse rode by on his bike, waving with one hand, his other gripping a superhero drawing. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Shaq," he shouted. Shaq lifted his hand in a wave, and for the first time in weeks, his smile wasn't quiet. It was real. Whole. Not because his name had been cleared, but because his voice had been heard. And that changed everything. Stories like this aren't just about dogs or drama. They're mirrors. If it made you pause, reflect, or feel something real, you're already part of the change. Let this be the kind of street you'd want to walk down. Stay curious. Stay human. And next time someone points a finger, ask where it's been before you look where it's going.